Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us today. I'm Reed Wilson, the founder and editor of Pluribus News, and I'm glad that you're here for what I think is going to be a pretty fun conversation. Election Day is just over 4 weeks away, and more than 1 million Americans have already cast their ballot. Voters in 11 states will choose new governors this year, and I'm thrilled to have some great guests today to talk through those key states. We'll hear from Kansas Governor Laura Kelly, who heads the Democratic Governors Association, Mississippi Governor Tate Reeves, who's on the executive board of the Republican Governors Association, and then my colleague Kyle Trigstad, who's just a total political junkie like I am. So let's kick things off, starting with my conversation earlier this week with Kansas Governor Laura Kelly. Governor Kelly is serving her second term in office after winning re-election in 2022. Governor Kelly, thanks for joining us today. Let's start with the national political climate. Here we are 4 weeks out from Election Day. What's your 30,000-foot view of the electorate? What are voters voting on?
Well, what I hope they're voting on is the restoration of inclusiveness and a United States of America. We have been just so polarized for so long. It will be a blessing to have a president and a vice president in place who really can work to bring us back together. What I'm hearing from people, there's a lot of excitement. Obviously, I hear more from Democrats than from Republicans, but there is a lot of excitement about the ticket that's there. It's fresh, it's new, it's very comprehensive. I think we've got coastal, but we've also got Midwestern. So there's something for everybody there, and everybody, I think, feels represented by that ticket.
Yeah, a lot of voters vote with their pocketbooks. When you're talking to candidates running for governor across the country, what do you tell them? How do Democrats talk about the economy without reminding voters that we just went through the biggest inflationary period since the 1980s?
Well, I think you have to tell them, one, that you recognize what they've been going through, and then what you intend to do about it. For instance, when I was running for governor in 22, I made it very clear that I understood people were hurting. They were just coming out of the pandemic. There were lots and lots of issues with employment, inflation, and whatnot. And so we really did run on a ticket that we've actually fulfilled. The promise to eliminate food sales tax, for instance. Kansas has one of the highest or did have one of the highest food sales tax, 6.5%. We promised to eliminate that. And I think that kind of discussion, what are you concretely going to do to fix my problem?
Mhm. Abortion rights has been a key part of the Democratic pitch to voters in the years since Roe v. Wade was overturned. How important are abortion rights to Democratic campaigns this year?
I think more important than ever, because we're on the offense here versus the defense, which I think is where we have been in the past. For instance, here in Kansas, that right after Roe v. Wade was tossed out, Kansas became the very first state to vote on the issue of women's reproductive rights. And overwhelmingly in Kansas, which most people think of as a very conservative red state, overwhelmingly Kansans voted to protect women's reproductive rights. And I think you're seeing that all over. We saw it happen in Michigan. We saw it happen in Ohio. So it's red states, blue states. I think it's a very, very important issue. And I think it will be a get out the vote driver.
Yeah, yeah. Especially in those states where it's literally on the ballot this year, right?
Literally on the ballot.
Republicans, we hear a lot of talk about crime and immigration, two areas where voters seem to lean more to the right. How do Democrats blunt that advantage? How do you advise your candidates?
Well, I think one, again, recognize that there is an immigration issue. There is a border issue. And I think being proactive in responding to that is important for Democrats to do. I also think it's important to remind voters that there was actually an opportunity to make a major change in the border situation with that bipartisan bill that was essentially trumped. The former president came in and told Congress, don't do this. I want to use it as an election issue. I think we need to make that really clear. that you want a president who looks for solutions that work for the people, not one that plays political games.
Yeah, yeah. This has been such a tumultuous cycle. I would be remiss to not recognize the fact that you weren't the chair of the DGA before a certain somebody
Well,
became vice president. We'll
what
talk
I
about
want.
that. We'll talk about that in a minute. But I mean, overall, are you happy to see Vice President Harris leading the ticket rather than President Biden?
I think everybody is, including, I would bet, President Biden. When once the pain of stepping down waned, and he knows he did the right thing for the country, that he put his country before his own personal feelings, political ambitions. So I think even he's relieved at this point. And certainly you can see the excitement that the Harris-Walz ticket has generated. I mean, I went to the convention and it was palpable. I've never been to a convention before, so I have nothing to compare it to. But I can't imagine that there's ever been that much excitement. Maybe 2008, but certainly it was, people were ready, and they're ready not to just celebrate, but to do the hard work that they know it will take to get Harris and Walz elected. I don't think we're Pollyannish in thinking that this is a cakewalk. This is going to be a very close election, and I think that there are a lot of folks out there, Democrat, Republican, and Independent, who are working very hard to ensure that we go in the right direction.
Yeah. All right, let's talk about some specific races that the Democratic Governors Association is watching closely. I'm going to be selfish and start with my home state of Washington. The races between Attorney General Bob Ferguson and former Congressman Dave Reichert. How do you see this race? I mean, it's been a long time since Washington State elected a Republican governor.
It has been a long time, but maybe it's just the Irish Catholic in me. I would just always assume the worst and work hard to ensure that the best outcome happens. And I think we're doing the same thing in Washington State. I mean, clearly it is a blue state. It has traditionally elected a Democrat governor. But if you look back at Jay Inslee's last race, he only won by 3%. So that's not a race that we're going to take for granted. We're working aggressively to ensure victory in Washington State.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we've got a great candidate,
Mm-hmm.
and we've got in many ways a great opponent. One that really is way too far to the right for a state like Washington.
Mm-hmm. Let's turn to New Hampshire. Former U.S. Senator Kelly Ayotte, former Manchester Mayor Joyce Craig, in a neck-and-neck race. I mean, I wish they would have their primary a little early than the middle of September. But Ayotte is outspending Craig by a pretty wide margin. This feels like your top flip opportunity of the year. Is that how you see it?
It is our top flip opportunity. And the fact that Kelly Ayotte is, so far outspending Joyce Craig, but it's still neck and neck. In fact, it's been merging. Just a few weeks ago, month ago, it wasn't that close, but now it is. It is absolutely tied, essentially. And I think that speaks well of that the momentum is on Joyce Craig's side, and that she's right on the issues. And I think New Hampshire's, being who they are, will decide to put her in office.
No. Governor Sununu up in New Hampshire, I mean, has won by big margins. At the same time, Democrats have won on the same ticket there. I mean, how do you tie Senator Ayotte to Trump, to unpopular Republicans? What's the pitch there?
Well, I think with Ayotte, you can tie her to Trump. It's very clear. She's got a record. I also think, abortion, just personal freedom is very important in New Hampshire. I mean, their license plates? What, live free or die? So, they don't like government interference. And there's no way the government interferes more than by getting between a woman and her doctor in a medical office. So I think that's all you need. I don't even know you need to tie her to Trump that much. You can, but I think her own record speaks for itself and will be her downfall.
We've all heard about North Carolina and Lieutenant Governor Mark Robinson's online habits, which I have to say he denies. But before all this broke, I mean, how were Democrats planning to get Attorney General Josh Stein elected over Mark Robinson?
Well, on Josh Stein, being who Josh Stein is, and the record that he has, he's been an incredible attorney general in the state of North Carolina. And he's running a very, very good campaign. He's really dealing directly with North Carolinians, talking about the kitchen table issues that matter to them, wanting to bring down costs for the middle class, recognizing that inflation has been an issue. And I think he's doing everything right for that. And I do think, you can just take a look at what's going on in North Carolina right now, the devastation that state has just incurred. I think North Carolinians are going to want a serious person as their governor, because it's so obvious that there are very serious issues, serious problems that need to be resolved. And you can't have somebody like a Mark Robinson who is neither serious nor qualified.
Yeah. Okay. Finally, I want to mention Montana, where Governor Greg Gianforte is running for re-election against a former gun industry executive. Democrats can win Montana in the right circumstances. Can you build those circumstances this year?
I think we're doing a pretty good job. There was Steve Bullock was the Democratic governor of Montana just before Gianforte got into place. So I think there's a real opportunity there. And we are working with our very good candidate who really does have his finger on the pulse of Montanans. So I think, and we can build also on the unpopularity of the current governor. He really hasn't done himself a lot of favors in a lot of ways during his time in office. So I think Montanans have a really good option in Ryan Busse, and I'm confident that he will keep that race close and hopefully get over the finish line.
Yeah. There are 4 other Republican open seats beyond New Hampshire. There's North Dakota, Missouri, Indiana, West Virginia. Do you have any, even the slightest optimism for any of those 4 candidates?
Indiana, I think, is a state that it is surprisingly close. That may be a sleeper, and we're certainly keeping our eyes on it closely. The polling is out there now, and it's becoming one of those neck and neck races. So I think that might be a November surprise.
Mm-hmm. Let me switch focus a little bit here. I want to talk about Kansas specifically, because I think you're going through something that we're seeing in a lot of other states where Republicans hold a lot of legislative seats. You've spent a lot of time and money trying to break the supermajority in the legislature. We see Democrats doing the same thing in places like North Carolina and Wisconsin. Tell us about that. I mean, why does breaking a supermajority matter, and how realistic is it in a place like Kansas?
Well, it's very realistic in a place like Kansas. We only need to flip 2 seats in our House and 3 seats in our Senate. And we have some very good candidates in both chambers running to flip those seats. We also have focused our efforts. I created a PAC specifically to break the supermajority. We've got other entities in the state interested in the same thing. And we're, as much as the law allows, we're working together so that we are really targeting races and going for the ones where we got the good candidates, where I did well in 22. And where we think we can flip. So it's taking that really coordinated effort. It's important to do because, well, very specifically right now, because, I've been able to sustain a lot of vetoes. I think I vetoed more bills than any other governor in the state's history, but we've been able to sustain a lot of those. We did that, though, because we had about 4, 5, 6 Republicans who would, depending upon the issue, come over and help us sustain it. Unfortunately, 4 of those folks decided not to run again. So now it's absolutely imperative that we flip that seat from Republican to Democrat because we don't have any Republicans left to help us sustain those vetoes. So that's why it is imperative.
Yeah. Do you think national Democrats, spend enough time and attention on state level races?
More and more so. I've been pleasantly surprised this year that the DLCC has come into Kansas. and focusing on our state house races. So I think we're seeing. I think and maybe it was because of what happened during the Trump administration, it made it so clear that in order to get anything done, you really did have to work at a state level. And I think that's why governor's races have become so much more important and prominent and supported. But I think they also recognize that even if you've got a good governor, if you have supermajority in your state houses, that's going to really impede the ability of a good governor to get things done. So I just think there's recognition now that the states are really where things are happening.
Yeah.
It helps that Congress has a hard time getting anything done. So a lot of entities have turned to the states to push their issues forward.
And that's why we exist, to cover the states. So thank you for saying that. I teased this a little earlier. The last question for you, as I mentioned earlier this cycle, of course, Minnesota Governor Tim Walz was running the Democratic Governors Association. When Vice President Harris selected him as her running mate, he had to take a leave, and you stepped in. Take us through that week that Vice President.
I have forgiven Tim for.
Well, take us through it. Tell us. I mean, how did you find out, and how did you find out not just that he was the pick, but that you were going to have to step into this role?
Well, how did I find out that he was picked? I think the DGA let me know, because I think they wanted me to be the first to know, and then also for them to be the first to tell me that tag, you're it. So, and certainly I wasn't looking to elevate, but I couldn't be happier than to have Tim Walz on the ticket. First of all, I think he brings so much to that ticket. He's sort of out of central casting from my perspective. You got a coach, you got a teacher, he's been a congressperson, he's been a governor. What more could you ask? And then he's Tim Walz, who is just as real a person as you could ever imagine. So I'm thrilled I'm thrilled with the prospect of his being in the White House. And, I'm hoping that they put the Intergovernmental Affairs Office underneath his office. It would be so great to have a governor in there who really understands what it's like and what kind of partnerships can and should be built between the White House and the states.
All right. Kansas Governor Laura Kelly, you've been very generous with your time. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
All right, now it's my pleasure to welcome Mississippi Governor Tate Reeves to the conversation. Governor Reeves is serving his second term in office after winning re-election last year, and he serves on the executive committee of the Republican Governors Association. So, Governor Reeves, thank you for joining us today. Let's start with sort of the national political climate. Here we are, four-ish weeks out from Election Day. What's your 30,000-foot view of the electorate? What are voters voting on?
Well, obviously, if you look at polling, the presidential race at the top of the ticket is extremely close in every swing state. In some of those, the vice president is leading, and many of those, President Trump is leading. But in all of those states, the margin is within the margin of error on polling, and so we have a very divided electorate. We still have a fairly large number of people that are undecided. But I think when you look at the political climate, the issues that are ultimately going to lead the day, and the reason I'm optimistic about the outcome of the presidential and the Senate and the House races as well, is the issues that are going to lead the day are primarily economic. The question that is always asked every 4-year cycle, when you have a period where there's basically a presidential campaign running for re-election, and although the name on the ballot is now Harris, not Biden, the reality is that the policies are the same. The policies that the vice president are going to pursue are the same policies that she's been supporting for the last 4 years. And so I think that the economic issues are going to come to the forefront. I think the question of, are you better off today than you were 4 years ago, is what's ultimately going to drive the decision-making process for independent voters. And the reality is, across the board, I think that you're going to see that gas prices are up, food prices are up. People, particularly those in the middle, do not think they're better off than they were 4 years ago. And because of that, I think the stage is set for a very successful election for my fellow Republicans around the country.
So tell me, how does that work? I mean, you've got some experience running in an environment with a Democratic White House. You just won re-election last year. How do you, as you're running a governor's campaign, how do you connect what's happening at the federal level with what's happening at the state level? Even though the two executives are obviously two very different people.
Well, I will tell you, I do think that running governor's races are very different than running Senate races. It is very difficult for, and as an example, someone like Tester in Montana or Sherrod Brown in Ohio, it's very difficult for them to differentiate themselves from the head of their ticket. The reality is that what you have in senatorial races is the policies of the Biden-Harris White House have been universally supported by Tester, have been universally supported by other Senate candidates, Democrat Senate candidates across the country. And I think that's going to hurt them. Now, when you talk about governor's races, you actually have an opportunity to change the narrative there, because governors really do actually do stuff, and they really have the opportunity to affect people's lives. And so no matter what's happening in Washington, D.C., there are governors all across this country on both sides of the aisle that are focused on trying to do what they believe to be is in the best interest of their constituents. And and that's the reason that you see in governor's races in presidential election years, there can be quite a number of ticket splitters. And I think we'll see that in a number of states this year.
Yeah, I feel like governors are the only thing that allow voters to split tickets these days. So we hear a lot from Republicans about inflation, about the economy. Democrats, on the other hand, are spending a lot of this election talking about abortion rights, and they can point to a lot of big electoral wins in the last couple of years when abortion's been on the ballot. How do you think Republicans should counter this Democratic focus on abortion rights?
Well, look, there's no doubt that we had a major victory in Mississippi with respect to the litigation that went before the United States Supreme Court. And it should come as no surprise to anyone, as is often the case when there's been a case such as this, that there tends to be a pretty big swinging of the pendulum from a public perception. And that tends to really even itself out over a 3 or 4 or 5 year period. What we did as a state of Mississippi is we returned the decision-making process back to the states, because there is no guaranteed right to an abortion in our United States Constitution. It's just simply not there, regardless of what the Supreme Court ruled some 50 years ago. And I think we as Republicans have to recognize where we are in American history. And I will tell you, while the political pendulum has swung, I think in the short term, I've never fought this issue because of politics. I fight this issue because I believe it's the right thing to do. You know, the Bible teaches us to do what is able to protect the least amongst us. And there's no doubt that those unborn babies do not have a voice. And for people like me, it's incredibly important that we provide that voice. I think what you're going to find as we progress in time is that each individual state, based upon their own political views, has the ability to make those decisions. I think over time, you're going to see that there are going to be states, because look, the American people are not interested in unlimited abortion access. They're not interested in late term abortions. That is something that is discussed repeatedly. And I think when you look at polling, that is something that is very clear in the polling. And so I think most states are going to settle this at some area around 20 to 20 weeks or so. And then conservative states like Mississippi are going to have more restrictions on it. But I do think that the vast majority of undecided voters today, when you ask them what their number one issue is, it's going to be focused on economic issues, focused on the border, and our border czar, Kamala Harris's inability to be successful in managing that situation where over 10 million illegal aliens have come into our country under the Biden-Harris administration. And so I think that's where we are.
No. All right. Let me ask you about a couple of specific races, and I'll start with Washington State, where it's been a very long time since a Republican won an election there. How can Dave Reichert, a pretty sort of centrist, call him a George Bush Republican, how can he pull it off against Attorney General Bob Ferguson?
Well, obviously, when you talk about governor's races, and I alluded to this earlier, but I'm just going to come out and say it. Quality of candidates matters.
Mhm.
And there is no doubt that we have a great candidate in Dave Reichert. He has won in Washington State in districts, first when he ran as sheriff, and then as a member of Congress, in districts that are not easy to win in. And so we are monitoring that race very closely because we know we have an extremely capable, competent candidate. And again, we know we'll have a struggle at the top of the ticket there in the presidential race, as we have for the last 50 years in the state of Washington. But I think that that our candidate is one that certainly can be competitive there, and the way to be competitive is to talk about pocketbook issues, talk about the way in which he will govern that is different from their attorney general, talk about the things that he would do to bring economic growth and prosperity to their people, and invest in the people of Washington State. And really, I think that that's the path to victory there. And I know that he's working very hard to get that message out.
Yeah, yeah. Let's turn to New Hampshire, the other big, sort of call it the toss-up state. Polls show a close race between former Senator Kelly Ayotte and former Manchester Mayor Joyce Craig. Voters haven't picked two Republican governors in a row since the 1990s. What do you think of Ayotte's chances of succeeding Chris Sununu?
Look, I'm very bullish on Kelly's chances in New Hampshire. Again, it's a state where we're certainly not guaranteed to win the presidential race, and probably are the underdog there in the presidential race. But Kelly has a history of working across the aisle to get things done in the state of New Hampshire. She has a record to run on. And again, I will reiterate, in governor's races, candidates really matter. The Democrat nominee as the mayor of one of the larger cities in New Hampshire, by all accounts, raised taxes multiple times, broke campaign promises to do so. And so the people in New Hampshire who tend to not be real big fans of higher taxes, to vote for the Democrat nominee, they have to vote for higher taxes for themselves, because they know, just like she did when she was the mayor, she will do so if she is elected governor. The reality is that Governor Sununu is immensely popular there, and he's popular because why? Because he's been successful managing that state. I believe that Kelly will come in and run the state and continue the trajectory from Governor Sununu. And I believe that a lot of people in New Hampshire are willing to cross party labels and vote one way in the presidential and a different way in the gubernatorial race. And I think Kelly has a great shot at helping us hold New Hampshire, and we're certainly hopeful that she can do so.
Yeah, well, Governor Sununu is one who had particular success in that sort of crossover vote over his career. So he's not even 50 yet. Can you believe that? Anyway, so we all know about North Carolina and what's happened over the last couple of weeks with Lieutenant Governor Mark Robinson. I don't want to focus on that too much, but I do want to ask, I mean, are his problems going to become a problem for Republicans across the ticket, whether it's for former President Trump's chances in a swing state or for legislative Republicans? This has to have some kind of impact.
Well, I think that we're monitoring that very closely. I don't think it's going to have any impact at the top of the ticket. I don't think it's going to impact President Trump, because reality is, when people from North Carolina go to the polls on election day, or if they choose to vote early, they're going to know both candidates. They're going to know President Trump. They're going to know the policies of President Biden and Vice President Kamala Harris, and they're going to vote for who they think is going to do the best job for our country. And I think President Trump's going to win North Carolina because of that. Clearly, we all know that some of the things that Mark Robinson have said over the years have made it difficult for a lot of us who support his policies. I will point out that I was personally involved and engaged in the gubernatorial race back 4 years ago as a good friend of mine, Dan Forrest, who we both served as lieutenant governors together, was the Republican nominee, and Dan lost that race to the incumbent. But at that time, Mark Robinson actually outperformed our candidate for governor. And so I think Mark's going to outperform the polls Whether he can narrow the race and make it very competitive at the end, we'll just have to watch and see. But there's no doubt that I think that the North Carolina is going to go to President Trump, and I think that that the gubernatorial race will not have an impact on the top of the ticket, and we'll just have to see what's going to happen in legislative races. I don't think it'll have an impact because typically what you see in down ticket races in the House and the Senate is the districts are so small that everybody knows everybody, and so I think that we'll be fine there as well.
Yeah. Okay. You've mentioned a couple of the bigger U.S. Senate races this year, Montana, Ohio. I mean, these are races that attract literally hundreds of millions of dollars, right? And that same amount of spending doesn't seem to be directed to gubernatorial contests, to down ballot contests. Do you think national Republicans have spent enough time and attention on these state level races across the country, or is this something the party needs to do better at?
Well, let me say this, and let me start with this. It seems to me, and I can tell you about my own example last year, it seems to me that no matter the race, the Democrats have unlimited money. It is something that we've seen in American politics the last 5 or so years that is just mind-boggling to me, the literal billions of dollars that the far left is spending on elections. We all know that President Trump's getting outspent every single day right now. Last year in Mississippi, I had a race for re-election in which my Democrat opponent, who had never been elected statewide, literally spent over $15 million in Mississippi, over 80% of which came from out of state, the vast majority of which came from California and New York. They just are spending inordinate amounts of money, and it certainly complicates things. And that's an issue that we as Republicans nationally are going to have to figure out. If we're going to be competitive, we're going to have to compete from a money standpoint. I believe our ideas are far superior to the liberal ideas of Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. I believe that a majority of Americans believe that our ideas are better for the American people and the American public than Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. However, when they have a megaphone in which they are spending millions and millions of dollars more in every single race across the board, it makes it difficult to compete. And so there's no question about that. I think you look at some of the races that we have across the country right now. As we began this election cycle, I was hopeful that we would see Senate races in places obviously like West Virginia and Montana and maybe Ohio, where Republicans could build out larger and larger leads as we got closer to the election. And we're beginning to see that. I'm hopeful that that allows us to be competitive from a financial standpoint in states like Nevada and Pennsylvania, where we can maybe run up the score and win not just the majority in the U.S. Senate, but have a couple of seat cushion, because we know that in this business, the next election cycle is coming. And that's one of the things we look at as governors is while 2024 is incredibly important and we have pickup opportunities, we also have 2 races next year and 38 races in 2026. And we want to be competitive in those as well.
Yeah. Of course, Mississippi doesn't have any statewide races up for election this year. You all just had them last year. But I wanted to ask about 2 initiatives, one that you back and one that I think you've been a little more skeptical of coming up in the next session. First of all, is this the year you can get ending the income tax across the finish line in the legislature?
Well, we are working so very hard on it. First of all, let me applaud what we have done. There are 9 states in America that have no income tax. Of the 41 states that do have one, Mississippi today has the 5th lowest income tax in America. We also have the highest exclusion, where the first $36,000 for a married couple is not taxed. So we have a 0 income tax for everyone that earns up to the $36,000, and we have no income tax on retirement income. So those are the good things, but we want it to go to 0. We want to become the 10th state in America that has no income tax. We are working very, very hard to make that a reality. We've cut taxes twice, the largest tax cut in Mississippi history, twice in the last 10 years. And I am hopeful that we can get that across the finish line this year. We just teamed up with Speaker of the House, Jason White, and his tax study committee to do a big event last week. There was a lot of momentum around eliminating the income tax. Our economy is soaring. We have fewer people out of work than we've ever had. Mississippi has the 5th lowest unemployment rate in the country right now. That's something that people around America don't necessarily know and may not even believe. But again, we have the 5th lowest unemployment rate in the entire country. I'm excited about where we're going, and I'm hopeful we get that across the finish line this session.
Yeah. And the last thing, Medicaid expansion. I know some legislative leaders have been behind it. You've been much more skeptical about it. Do you expect it to come up again this year? And what could they do to win your signature?
Well, there's no doubt that it's going to come up this year because it's come up in some form or fashion every year for the last 13 years that I've been in elected office, and I've been opposed to Obamacare expansion in Mississippi for those 13 years. And I'm going to continue to oppose it. And, it's obviously they worked very, very hard last year to get that done in the legislature, a unanimous support by the Democrats, and a few Republicans joined them. And I just think it's the wrong policy for the state of Mississippi. I believe very strongly that we need more people in the workforce. Our workforce participation rate is too low. We need more workers working because we have more jobs than we have people available for those jobs. It's driving per capita incomes up. And I just believe if you give another reason for people to not work, then some will choose to not do so. And so we're working certainly very hard to oppose that particular policy. We've been successful to date. And I believe that our economy is better off because of it.
They're just a hard no on Medicaid expansion.
I'm a hard no on Medicaid expansion and have been for 13 years now.
Gotcha. All right. Well, we'll leave it there. Mississippi Governor Tate Reeves, you have been incredibly generous with your time. Thanks so much for being with us today.
Reed, thanks for having me on. You have a great day.
You too. So we've heard from Governor Kelly of Kansas and Governor Reeves of Mississippi, and now I'm bringing in Kyle Trigstad, managing editor at Pluribus News, to give a little more sort of flavor to these races this year. And Kyle, I feel like the presidential year, when there are only about 11 governor's races up, it's always, I don't want to call it the boring year, but it's the year when a lot of the states that are up for election have long trends of sticking with one party or the other. And I don't know, you were talking earlier about sort of the tiers of the races that we see. So go through those tiers and try to put everything in its place.
Yeah, well, I mean, you talk about states kind of sticking with one party for a streak. I mean, thankfully we have New Hampshire, because yes, they have stuck with Republican Chris Sununu for 4 terms, but he is now leaving office voluntarily. And so that leaves us with the most competitive seat on the board. So we've got the primary was less than a month ago. So this is a general election race that is so shrunk. It's less than 2 months, which is unheard of anywhere else in the country, really. And so we have former U.S. Senator Kelly Ayotte, and we've got Manchester Mayor Joyce Craig, and it's starting to get heated up. I would say even just this week, it feels a little bit hotter. They're starting to go after each other on taxes, going back and forth on taxes, and reproductive rights, as it's going to be battled everywhere in this country. It feels like it's definitely going to be a part of this discussion in this race. So you got to start with New Hampshire, but generally overall, I would say at least 7 of the seats of the 11 up this year are safe. This is by far the most competitive. The other one that I think we probably would have been talking about had the primary gone a different way is North Carolina. I think that we would have been saying this is the most competitive race. This is a Democratic open seat where Attorney General Josh Stein, the Democrat, is running to hold it. And unfortunately for Republicans, their nominee is Lieutenant Governor Mark Robinson, who has just been nothing but sort of a dark storm cloud for the Republican Party, and it really I don't know, got bad in the past 2 weeks.
Yeah,
would you say?
I mean, look, it's a flaming train wreck down there, and
yeah,
everybody saw this coming, right? Mark Robinson has a long history of inflammatory remarks, And I was actually joking after the CNN report came out, which important to say, I think this is the third time now I've said this in this event, that he denies the reports on CNN and others about his online activity. But when that report came out, there wasn't terribly much in it that was new. He had said all of that stuff, very publicly in other forums. So, Robinson was never the ideal Republican candidate, but sure enough, Josh Stein is looking like he's going to be the next governor of the state of North Carolina. In New Hampshire, we talk about these trends, and I sort of sticking with one party. I went back and looked, and New Hampshire has not elected back-to-back Republican governors, separate Republican governors, since Judd Gregg left office back in 1993 to take his seat in the U.S. Senate. So New Hampshire is a state that likes to go back and forth between its two candidates. But boy, what a contrast between somebody like a Chris Sununu and President Trump, right? Former President Trump. And so I feel like this entire race comes down to, where do voters see Kelly Ayotte on that spectrum? Do they see her as a Sununu ally, which she was when she was in the Senate, or a Trump, in the Trump mold, which is not something that New Hampshire voters terribly like. He has never won New Hampshire in his two previous races, and he sure doesn't look like he's going to win it this time around. So,
yeah, well, hopefully she wants both, right? She wants to get support from both groups, but she's made it clear who she's running as. She had an ad that said, "I will keep us on the Sununu path."
Yeah.
Quote. So she's made it clear she's reaching over for the middle, which you have to do in New Hampshire, a swing state, and I think that's probably a pretty good message, given that Sununu did so well over the past few elections.
Yeah. And the history there, by the way, New Hampshire has a long tradition of electing women governors. Both Jeanne Shaheen and Maggie Hassan, the two U.S. senators, were governors. Of course, Ayotte was Hassan's predecessor there. This, though, is the first New Hampshire race that features two women as the major party nominees. So there's something new and different there. We also talked a lot about Washington State, my home state. Talk about a streak. It has not elected a Republican governor since 1980. It's the longest streak of Democratic governors elected in America, in the country today as it stands. And I feel like I've been making jokes about Dave Reichert running for governor for 20 years. Like he's been on the brink, almost running, and finally he jumps in after leaving Congress. It seems strange, but he's like in that Republican Washington mold of somebody who can get elected statewide.
That's right. I mean, he's like, it seemed like, maybe 12 years ago, he would have been the perfect candidate to run. He's running now. He probably gives them as good a chance they're going to have. We haven't seen any polling in a month there, from what I can tell. The last one I saw was early September, and Ferguson was up 10 or 10, 11, 12, something like that. Yeah. So it wasn't looking close. I'm praying for another poll so we can see how closely we need to be watching this, but I'm guessing Ferguson's up comfortably.
Yeah. Funny, I think we're going to see AGs, what's the old joke? A senator looks in the mirror and sees a president looking back at them. Well, I think an AG looks in the mirror and sees a governor looking back at them. So we got Josh Stein in North Carolina, Patrick Morrisey, likely the next governor of West Virginia, and now Bob Ferguson in Washington State, all of whom come from the AG ranks and joining other governors like Mike DeWine in Ohio, Josh Shapiro in Pennsylvania. A lot of AGs moving up. So I feel like you have a better winning percentage as an AG than you do as, say, a lieutenant governor, even though the lieutenant governor might be slightly higher on the pecking order. But one other one we wanted to talk about, Indiana. This I feel like I'm seeing wildly disparate polls here. Some suggest that Mike Braun is running away with it. Others that the race may be a little closer.
So this is one I would say I'm keeping one squinted eye on. It's like I kind of like I'm seeing numbers that are interesting, but I don't totally believe them. We saw a DGA sponsored poll out this week or maybe it was last week that showed Braun up only 44 to 41. The real wild card here is the third party candidate. His name's Donald Rainwater. I think he's libertarian. He got over 11% 4 years ago. He's running again, and polls are showing him in the high single digits right now. Oftentimes you'll see a third party candidate poll higher than they actually get, but he actually got in double digits last time. So that could really swing the race if somehow McCormick can get up to 44 or 45%. That might be enough to actually win it if Rainwater can take enough away from Mike Braun. But the numbers I've seen, Braun is pretty sturdy in the mid 40s, and McCormick has generally been in the mid to high 30s, other than that TGA poll. So we'll see what happens there, but definitely keeping a squinted eye on it.
Yeah, and Indiana, another state with a long streak of Republicans. The last Democrat to win re-election, correct me if I'm wrong, I think it was Frank O'Bannon in 2000 before he passed away. But it's been a long time in Indiana since Democrats were relevant sort of at the statewide level. The other races that are up this year, nothing terribly exciting. I mean, the Missouri, House Minority Leader Crystal McQuaid is running for an open seat there against Lieutenant Governor Mike Kehoe. There's one race where the Lieutenant Governor became the Republican nominee. That was a really nasty Republican primary, but I feel like the Missouri is conservative enough that that Kehoe probably doesn't have much to worry about.
Yeah, it seems like it. I feel like the last time I was really covering Missouri as a potential swing state was 08, maybe. Obama sniffing it a little bit there, but since then it hasn't given us much to cover, unfortunately. But the other open seat is North Dakota on the Republican side, along with West Virginia, which you mentioned earlier, and then the Democratic side is Delaware, and again, not much to watch there. But one thing that I noticed this week it just tells you how much of a bummer North Carolina is for Republicans. Is this Washington Post came out with a poll in North Carolina, and it showed Trump leading Harris 50-48, and it showed Stein leading Robinson 54-38. I mean, to have a Republican presidential nominee doing so well, or at least leading slightly in a state, and you to be down well into the double digits is troubling. I'm sure a lot of Republicans are extremely frustrated right now.
Yeah, they're probably not the happiest folks. One other shout out important to note, I think, a couple of Republican governors running for re-election, including Governor Phil Scott in Vermont. Talk about the ultimate crossover vote getter. Phil Scott won his re-election 2 years ago. Of course, Vermont and New Hampshire, the two states that do 2-year terms instead of 4-year terms. Won his re-elect 2 years ago with, I think it was 72% of the vote. He didn't spend a dime on campaign advertising. So remarkable there. Wow. This time he is actually spending money, but it's mostly on his legislative allies trying to break a Democratic supermajority there in the legislature. But interesting to see, Phil Scott cruising to re-election as at the same, on the same ballot that Bernie Sanders is going to win a new term. And wait, is Sanders up this year? I might be screwing that up, but I think
I'm not sure. I'm not sure.
Folks, we only pay attention to governor's races. Those U.S. Senate guys, we only cover the governors when they become senator, after they've been senators, like Mike Braun, apparently.
That's right. That's right.
All right, cool. Anything else? Closing thoughts on governor's races, the general political landscape?
No, I think the only thing I would mention is on New Hampshire. One big issue potentially is legalization of marijuana. It's the only New England state where recreational marijuana is not legal, and Joyce Craig has been pounding that issue, saying she supports it and would support legislation on it. So we'll see if that swings a few votes.
That's been a real sort of odd bedfellows issue in the legislature. We've seen Republicans and Democrats, and I think it was the House Majority Leader who sponsored the bill, coming together to offer a bill. Sununu's been skeptical of state control versus sort of commercial control of the market. So yeah, that's interesting. And the broader point there, New Hampshire is one of the about half of states, I think it's 26 states that do not allow ballot initiatives. So if legalization is going to happen there, it's going to have to go through the legislature. And boy, talking about a sea change, a decade ago, can you imagine a legislature legalizing marijuana? And now we've seen New Jersey do it, and New York did it. And am I missing a state? Connecticut may have through the legislature as well, but it's been a couple of them there. So All right, we will leave it there. Thank you, Kyle. Thanks again to Governor Kelly and Governor Reeves. Thanks to all of you for watching. I'm Reed Wilson. Thanks for being a part of the Pluribus News community. We got a lot more events coming up in the next couple of weeks and months as we wrap up the year in policy. So keep an eye on your inbox, and thanks for joining us today.